My name's John Toussaint. I'm an internist and chair of the organization called Catalysis. And today, what I want to talk about is the power of personal Kaizen. And we've heard a lot about process improvement and metrics and incentives. And I want to turn this now to what does it take for us to personally actually transform culture. And so it starts again, what's the organization's purpose? If we go to the Shingo principles, you heard from Eric Dixon yesterday. This comes from UMass. They made it very clear, that leadership team, about what the organization's purpose is. It's about patients, it's about people, it's about our discoveries, and it's about the financial performance of the organization. These are their true north metrics. And so it's very clear to people who work there, the many thousands that work there, what they should be focusing improvement on. What's the basis of the management philosophy? Well, I mean, that's kind of why we're here, right? Shingo has created, the Shingo Institute has created this over the years. It really is a philosophical way of thinking about how do we build organizational excellence into everything we do. Starts with the principles, leads to the behaviors based on those principles, building systems, and then using tools to get results. And it's focused on those 10 important principles. But then we get to the question of how are leaders and managers supposed to act? And what are the behavioral expectations for leadership and management? We've published a few things on this. This was one that we published in the New England Journal, where we break down the various principles and then we look across the organization in terms of leadership, management, and frontline, and start to organize what those organizational behaviors are at each level. And so it's important to establish organizational behaviors at each level and really try to tie those back to these key principles. But what I want to talk about is what are the personal behaviors that are required to build an improvement culture. And we published another paper on this a while back, and really identified sort of 5 key behavioral dimensions or traits that we now have studied many different CEOs around the world, and have found that these are the 5 dimensions or traits that seem to be absolutely critical to building a culture of continuous improvement and ultimately organizational excellence in everything we do. So I always get a kick out of this quote from my friend and faculty member at Catalysis, who now is retired, Carl Hoover. Carl Hoover, he said, the challenge for executives is to move from knowing conceptually. So, especially as doctors, right? We know a lot, but are we actually practicing the behaviors that we need to truly transform the culture of our organization? So we have been working for years on what that process is. How do you actually change a behavior? And as we all know, that's the hardest thing to do. Change is great as long as I don't have to. But the reality is, as we look at building organizational excellence we do need to change. So here's a process that we have worked on for some time now, in which we look at these key behavioral traits or dimensions, and there's 5 of them. And so what we ask leaders to do is to actually rate themselves on these various dimensions. And I'm going to walk through them with you. But the first one is willingness. And if we think about that dimension, so the willingness to change, right? The willingness to learn things new about ourselves. If I were going to observe that trait, I would observe that by seeing some kind of reflection mechanism. So is the executive, is the leader, is the manager actually doing reflection on a weekly basis? Now, reflection doesn't count if it's in the shower or on the way to work in the car. We're talking about putting this into your calendar. Do you have time in your calendar to reflect on maybe a couple of questions? One is, what did I do this week that unleashed the creativity of my team? Or what did I do this week that shut my team down? So we need time to really spend on ourselves to understand how we're performing. The next dimension is humility. And if I were to come and observe you, what I would be looking for is, are you going to see? Are you going to the Gemba? Are you listening? Are you not telling people what to do, but actually trying to learn what is happening, what the real existing state is? The third dimension is curiosity, and how would I observe that? So again, we have these dimensions, but then we have observable behaviors. One of those observable behaviors would be, are you asking open-ended questions? Or are you sort of putting your own solution into the questions that you're asking a frontline worker? Another thing is effective listening. My friend and faculty member catalysis, Margie Hagany, says, listening is not waiting to talk. So are we actually empathetically listening to what people are trying to tell us, so we deeply understand what they're saying? And then finally, A3 thinking. So are we not jumping to the right side? Are we actually trying to understand background, current state, and understand the problem we're trying to solve? So those are all observable behaviors that I could see if I came to visit you in this dimension of curiosity. Next is perseverance, and this is not easy. It's not easy to change. And so, do you have a partner or a buddy? Again, I could observe that someone that's actually that you trust, that can give you feedback about your own performance. And then finally, do you have a coach? Because the reality is, we don't innately come to these ideas, this way of acting, and so we have to have some help along the way. So who's the coach? Is it an internal coach? Is it an external coach? And then the fifth one is self-discipline. And do you have leader standard work? So that's what I'd be looking for in terms of the observable behavior related to these things. Then what we like to have you do is rate yourself from 0 to 5 on all of these, both the dimensions and the observable behaviors. And that ends up giving you a chart that looks somewhat like this. This is an example from one of the CEOs we work with. And so you can see on the radar chart where the executive believes that there could be some focus. And again, this is a self-reflection mechanism. It's not meant to be a 360-degree organizational development measurement tool. This is a personal assessment of one's own core activities and behaviors. So if we think about that in terms of what's the process then, as we do these ratings, and what we suggest and what we've seen leaders do now for the last several years is use this process maybe every 3 or 4 months, pull out that radar chart and re-rate yourself and be honest about what it is that you want to focus on for the next few months. So what happens then is we actually put that into a personal improvement A3. And that's the ultimate basic personal Kaizen process, is to use an A3 instead of for problem solving, for actually developing oneself. And so I want to walk through this with you step by step. The personal development A3 is constantly changing, just like any other A3. You're going to have a lot of learnings that come along, and as you have those learnings, you're going to update this A3. So multiple iterations are important, and as you learn more things about yourself, you begin to reflect on what it is that you believe you should either improve or not necessarily improve, but follow your strengths. So we're a big believer that we all have strengths. How can we leverage those strengths to be better leaders? So this is the format that we use for the personal A3. It was originally developed by faculty member at Catalysis, Margie Hagney. And I want to walk through a specific example using this personal A3 template with you with a friend of mine. His name is Al Pilong. He is the CEO now, Novant. And when I was working with him, he was the chief operating officer. So this was his personal A3. I don't expect you to read this because I'm going to go through each box with you. But the first box really is, or the first step is, the title, the date, draft number, right? So the title is important. What are we trying to accomplish here, right? What's the purpose of doing this? And in Mr. Pilong's case, it was My Personal Leadership Development Journey. That was his title. And what we're going to look at is his version 3 of this personal A3 that he was working on. So the question that we ask is, why should I improve myself to be a coach who creates an organization filled with problem solvers? Why should I do that? So that's what we start with as our question in the first box of this of the personal A3. And the reason is that personal change is critical to changing culture. This is like I said before, it's a self-reflection mechanism. So it's really for you. It's not for, if you share it with your colleagues, subordinates, that's great, but you don't have to. And then the point of this first box is what's the burning platform? Why are we even talking about the fact that you might want to do some things differently as a leader? So this is what he said: because the challenges facing our organization demand transformation, requires complete alignment up and down. My chief role is to be an effective coach for my team, so they can coach and develop problem solvers. That's the only way we're going to sustain change and engage everyone in the process. So that was his burning platform. It's that, I can't solve all the problems if I don't create a team that really can function in a dynamic and rapid way. We're not going to be able to meet the conditions of this crazy industry we call healthcare. So the current state, and this is where the radar chart that I just went through with you would go, right? So that would be some of the data that we would use to think about what are the changes that we might want to work on. So the question we ask in this box are, what are specific personal habits or actions that are working to build a culture of problem solvers or that are getting in the way? So, you got to the level that you got to because you have certain strengths. And so in the current state of a personal A3, we want to know both things. We want to know, okay, what are you really good at? And how might that actually help us leverage our leadership style and activities? And then what are the things that, maybe there could be some improvement. So interestingly enough, in Mr. Pilong's case, it was I tend to do rather than coach others to do. And I've reduced this to a simple sentence. It was much more to the current state than this, but the reality is, it's many times it's just easier to do it yourself, and it's hard to be a good coach, right? So that was the struggle here for this particular individual. So rather than a problem statement, when we use a personal A3, we're not looking to you as being a problem, okay? We're looking at it from the standpoint of what are the opportunities that I have to be a better leader. And since we all want to be better leaders, that's the way we ought to think about it, is what's the opportunity for me to constantly be improving me, not the organization, me. So my comfort in this case, my comfort with doing the improvement myself, rather than aligning and enabling others to do the improvement, results in little organization change, uneven results in personal frustration and burnout. So, And in some ways, this is becoming very personal for him, right? It's like, wow, I'm burning out. I can't have all these people coming dumping all this stuff on my desk to solve these problems. Something's got to give here. And so his goal was to focus on developing and coaching others in the transformation journey to build a culture of continuous improvement. And then my question as his coach was, okay, how much by when? But the point was that becoming a coach was really what he felt was going to be the thing that he was shooting for. So the analysis, again, we're looking at why does the behavior exist, right? So it's just easier to do this stuff myself, right? I mean, that's what he thought, and I think that's many of us have been there before. It's great, you're a problem solver, you're a hero, so you get all this personal feedback. There is no standard for coaching, so everybody just does whatever they want, and that means that we aren't at the leadership level having the right conversation. So I think a very deeply thought through sort of set of analyses here about, why he's acting the way he's acting. So after 2 or 3 months, we started talking about experiments. So just like any good A3 thinker, you're going to spend 2 or 3 months on the left side before you ever get to the right side. So the question in this box is, what are the experiments that I'm going to try to become a better coach now? Because that's the target, right? So he developed and implemented a standard template for his one-on-one meetings in which coaching was actually ingrained in that. He began to round at the Gemba much more frequently, and quarterly sounds like not very frequently, but when you have 20 senior executives reporting to you in a geography of several hundred miles, it's difficult. And then he also decided he really needed to start a journal, which would be, that behavioral dimension of willingness. How do I reflect on how I'm actually doing as a leader? So the steps that I want to take so this is a plan. So he developed a one-on-one template. He started to implement these one-on-one discussions and set expectations for how this was going to be different than what he'd had in the past with his direct reports. He actually had his assistant schedule specific personal reflection time. And then he worked on putting in his schedule the rounding activities throughout these. I think there were 10 or 12 different hospitals that he was in charge of. And so then how do I know that it's working? So he was going to try to get feedback from his direct reports. I don't know about you, but I've found that to be a miserable experience. People aren't willing to really sit down and tell their boss the truth. How will I know if I'm off plan? Self-reflection. Reflection is really important. How do I make time to practice? Well, we got to get it in the standard work, right? So your calendar is part of your standard work. And then what's the process for ongoing reflection? And that is really his journal and the radar chart. And then, who did he involve? He involved both his boss and I was coaching him at that time, so he was getting feedback from a couple of us. So this template, the Personal A3 template, is actually available. And if you reach out to us at info@createvalue.org, we're happy to follow up with you. It's also we've written a new book which has a whole section on this activity of personal Kaizen. You can download through links that are in the book. You can download the templates that I've shown you today, and you can get started right now, because I think this is something that is something that you have to start to practice. You have to start to work with it. It's like everything else related to organizational excellence. You don't learn in a book, you'll learn by doing. And this, the Personal A3 process and the radar chart measurement are things that you learn by doing. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions or arguments.
John, can you see the Q&A box by any chance?
Let's see here. Yes,
If not, I
can.
can read the questions to you.
Yes, I can. Do you contrast the self-assessment with your own observations? How self-aware are leaders when they use it? Yes, I guess that's kind of part of the process of having a you know, a buddy or a coach, so that when if you have someone you can trust, you can then bounce off your thoughts about your performance versus what they are seeing. So it's important to have a feedback mechanism beyond your own self-reflection. Although I must say, you know, we've worked with probably, you know, 75 to 100 CEOs now, and this self-reflection process is the most powerful thing that I've seen in terms of change management for at least top level executives. How important is the standard work in terms of agenda and time sharing among the CEO and his people? The standard work was very important because what it did was it created the discipline for both he and his direct reports that this activity was actually going to happen. It was going to happen regularly. And the original template that he built, of course, changed quite a lot over time because that he was having, you know, catchball conversations back and forth. Are the questions I'm asking you actually helping or not? And as that conversation continued, they, you know, they changed the template of the sessions so that his direct reports actually were finding them more and more valuable. So this is important. It's not a one-way street. I mean, this is catchball. And so when you go into it with the idea that, you know, this is really I want to understand from an empathetic standpoint what you're saying, but I also want to do that in a way that both of us are learning. And I'm learning what you're thinking, and I'm hopefully coaching you along the way. So the standard was really, really important. And that's certainly what I've heard from many CEOs. That standard for how those conversations happen is critical to actually making change happen from the standpoint of the cultural transformation of the people in the organization. How important is no, we already did that one.
There's one up above that I think you might miss. Was there any animosity? Do you see that question?
That seemed to be to the previous speaker. Was there any animosity amongst production team?
Not cleared out yet, huh?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, here's another one. Could you go back to the slide with the A3 template again? I didn't have a chance to read through the sections. Yeah, if you want, we can, you know, we can, if you send me an email, I can send that to you. Can you rate yourself high on willingness and low on reflection? How does that work? Yeah, that's an interesting question. When you look at the dimensions, like willingness, which is a dimension, right? And you rate yourself, I'm ready to change. I'm willing to change. Let's go. And then you don't have a process to do that, you know, an observable process. That tells you something, right? So maybe when you go back and re-rate yourself, you're rating yourself lower, because that's kind of what those observable behaviors do for you, is they tell you really where you stand with that overall dimension. So if you're not doing anything, then you really can't rate yourself very highly. Let's see, what else is there here? How accurate have you found the self-assessments to be? You know, what we found is that the self-assessments are accurate at the point that they're done. And what's interesting is they change over time. So, you know, you may find that, you know, you're not really focused enough on Gemba. So then you focus on Gemba, and then what happens is your leader standard work falls down a little bit. And so that's why it's important to go back at it every 3 or 4 months with that radar chart, because it helps you understand, you know, from your own perspective, you know, gee, I really haven't spent enough time at the Gemba, or gee, I really need to, the questions I'm asking are just not unleashing the creativity of my people. So that's what it makes you do, is think about those activities. Let's see.
I think Ken Siegel's is more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
Then we have,
How long have you used the leadership assessment and how effective? So we've been using this since 2014 now. And like I said, we've used it probably almost with 100 different CEOs around the world. And we have found that it works anywhere from Johannesburg, South Africa to Helsinki, Finland to, you know, I mean, you name it. This process works. And the reason it works is that executive leaders are willing and committed to making the changes that are required to build organizational excellence into their organization. So this isn't going to be something for somebody that's kind of, you know, peanut butter spreading lean. This is going to be something where I am absolutely committed to changing my organization. And I realize that I can't do that until I change some of the things that I do. And when you have a commitment of a leader or manager like that, this process works. It's not going to work for somebody that doesn't care or doesn't really want to learn. But if you've got people that really want to learn and are serious about what it is that, you know, that they know that they want to change, this really works. And are you willing to share the leadership self-assessment? Like I said, all of this stuff is in the book, and you can download all of the templates. You know, so there's links there. You know, you can get a digital link. But yeah, that's how we decided to do it, because there's several different templates, and I can't be sending templates to 1,000 different people. So that's the best way to get it.
and thanks for writing the book.
Thanks for your comments about the book, Ken.
That's right.
And helped us with giving some feedback. And
One final question. Do you think it works just as well for middle level management as executives?
We have had a lot of CEOs use it themselves, and then they you know, deploy that throughout their organization. And actually, they have book groups and work teams, and everybody's working on something. And this, you know, I've had CEOs that post it on their door. You know, post their personal A3 with their radar chart.
I've seen it.
Yeah, here's something that we're doing, that I'm doing, and I think, you know, we all ought to do it. And then it goes down the next layer, goes down the next layer, and it worked. You know, I mean, people start having conversations about this stuff. I mean, that's what we want to do, is have a conversation. It's not right or wrong. It's what we're working on to make our organization great. So I do think it, you know, everybody's got something they can work on. Everybody's got something that they can make better. There's no difference between making a process better in the organization and personal Kaizen. So I think it's powerful anywhere in the organization.